The celebration of the Yuletide is in the air, but Nigerians, both politicians and non-active politicians, are still very conscious of the general elections, which begins in about 6 weeks. One angle to the discussion has been the signing of the 2018 Electoral Amendment Bill.
His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari has taken a decision on the Electoral Amendment Bill 2018 in accordance with his powers under the 1999 Constitution, and has communicated that decision to the Senate and House of Representatives in accordance with the law.
Presidential decision to decline assent to the Electoral Amendment Bill 2018.
Refusing to assent to the Electoral Act shows clearly what is the intent of himself and his party on this issue. The whole world is watching. We have never, by precedents and customs and tradition, we have never debated a letter which is by way of information only.
There is a provision in our rules that guides this kind of communications, and I will advise that we follow the provisions of the rules. Can we have one house, please? One house.
You're welcome to this episode of Channels Beam, which seeks to know the fate of the Electoral Amendment Bill. I'm Ini John Mekwa, standing in for your regular host, Victor Matthias. The first thing on the program is the trending topics for the past week.
It was not business as usual when President Muhammadu Buhari presented the 2019 budget to a joint sitting of the National Assembly. Members were divided as some chaired while others jeered the president. Workers of the National Assembly also trended for not so good reasons. Members of the Parliamentary Staff Association of Nigeria on Monday took to the National Assembly in Abuja in a protest over unpaid salaries. The protesting workers barricaded the NAS complex, thereby preventing anyone from gaining access. "29-year-old Nigerian-born British heavyweight boxing star Anthony Joshua stayed in the news after he was awarded his OBE by Prince Charles in an investiture ceremony at Buckingham Palace on Thursday.
welcome back. Now to the discussion on the fate of the Electoral Amendment Bill. We have Ikemesit Effiong. He is a legal practitioner. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having
Well,
me.
also we have Hamid Bakare. He is a civil rights advocate. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So let me start with Ikemesit. What are your thoughts with the signing and it's too late for the amendment bill to be signed? What's your thought on it?
Well, so there are arguments on both sides that make sense. On the one hand, I doubt you would find that there are many Nigerians who think that our electoral laws as currently constituted are ideal. So there is indeed the need for reform. On the other hand, you have a situation where, from a legal and a practical standpoint, passing an amendment with a consequential amendment of the kind that the Electoral Amendment Bill aimed to bring into fruition so late in the process. We're looking at a situation where elections start in a little over 2 months,
Yes.
right? Would have raised all sorts of problematic issues. For example, if you're thinking from the legal standpoint, the subsisting law under which INEC issued out the notices on which the current election cycle essentially kick-started, right, is the Electoral Act 2010 as amended. When you think about the fact that a significant proportion of our political class have proven to be very litigious, going to the courts, going to the tribunals with all sorts of grievances and praying the courts for all sorts of remedies, it is indeed conceivable that you could have a situation where a losing candidate in 2019 goes to the court and asks the court to essentially validate an election because the law under which the notices were issued for their elections was not the law under which the elections were conducted. So, I mean, if I am sitting down here with you thinking of it, trust me, lawyers who essentially earn their meat and their bone, right, operating in the election tribunals would do so. And then from a practical standpoint, the new law was supposed to institute things like smart card readers and also infuse technology into managing things like the election register, for example. How are we going to implement that with 2 months, essentially
Okay,
to
but
the
some
vote?
people would say better late than never. Or we could just start the process and then, because we had the card reader, for instance, in the last election, and it was used in some parts and it wasn't used in some parts, and then legally, of course, it could not be enforced. So we are still where we were, in the last election. Isn't that what it means?
Well, the argument of better late than never is probably good if you got home late and you're trying to fix up dinner and it's 10 p.m. and you're saying, okay, it's better late than never. I'll have a late dinner and then tomorrow I'll autocorrect. But when it comes to managing things as consequential as elections, you've got to be very, very particular about what you're talking about. Nigeria has Africa's biggest electorate. You're talking about, at least according to the elections register, 64 to 65 million registered voters. Better late than never would not suffice when you're managing a process where potentially 64 to 65 million people will
let's
participate.
hear from Hamid. You also think this is not a situation of better late than never?
Yes, I go with him. The major question ought to be, what informed the urgency of this new bill? In 2010, what stopped the National Assembly from passing the anti-corruption bill? It has not been passed yet. So why this, if not for their selfish interest? I think it's a slap on our faces as Nigerians that we have the 8th Assembly right now, because they are doing their own selfish bidding, not for the benefit of all Nigerians. I see no, and I must commend the president for actually not dancing to their tune. Because what informed the urgency is still like it beats my imagination.
But this is the 5th time it's going to the presidency.
I'm not disputing that there are lots of lacuna in that bill. If you would permit me, I could even reel out some certain things that actually were omitted. Why were they omitted? It was one of the reasons, because see what happened in the United States of America when we're still battling with Russia actually peddling with the America's elections. And do you think Nigeria is ripe enough to even actually go there. So we don't even know what even transpired in their trip to Dubai to maybe to orchestrate something that would actually um, 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 that would actually stop this election from actually taking place, or maybe sabotage the election. No. So what informed their
Are
decision?
you saying, are you suspecting that there's something playing on the ground that
Yeah,
might disrupt the election?
exactly my point. Exactly, because what informed the urgency? That is just that is just a question begging for answers.
Well, isn't it time for the Nigerian electoral process to move to being, completely digital? Because we're talking about voting in diaspora, and this seemed to be like the primary or the foundation of it. So, isn't it time, or when do we now start this process?
I think a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a step, like everyone says, but with the right step, not just any step. But the thing is this: what is stopping us from giving INEC the authority, the autonomous authority for actually deciding what to do and when to do and how to do it? What is the business of the senators or the lawmakers peddling into the business of INEC? If we should give INEC the right to actually be the umpire it ought to be, we'll have a better Nigeria.
Ikemese, do you think that INEC needs more powers and there's no fear of abuse or manipulation in one way or the other?
I mean, with Nigerian institutions, there will always be the fear of abuse, and I think fundamentally at the heart of electoral reform, that is the most important thing. You've got a situation where Nigerian institutions in general, and I don't think that INEC is particularly I don't think INEC is alone in suffering this. I think Nigerian institutions have a certain inherent weakness, and they are, particularly subject to political interference. And when it comes to the matter of choosing which politicians will run the country for the next 4 years, it doesn't get more significant than influencing INEC. And so, yes, it would help that there is greater autonomy for INEC. Whether that will happen, well, that's the ultimate question.
Well, I think we first of all we also have to see if how independent. I mean, that has been one of the discussions.
Yeah.
How independent is INEC really, even as we speak. Before we go into giving them more powers.
Yes, it's a huge issue, right? And so in 2015, the former INEC chairman Untitled got props, right, for conducting what was seen by many people to be a reasonably good election. But then we had incidents then, and you'll be hard pressed to find people who would say INEC is in a significantly better place than it was in 2015. And so yes, the independent part of INEC continues to remain the most important part of the discussion around INEC. Yeah.
Okay, all right. We'll have to take a break now, but we will continue this discussion in just a moment. Do join us then.